Do you want to build a complete multi-level cavern for your D&D sessions in just a few minutes? Great! Today you will learn how to create the necessary pieces, and don't worry, I've done all the designing for you. All you need to do is follow along. Since it's modular system, you will be able to create infinite combinations, so it never gets boring. Plus, this set is incredibly compact and can be stored in a fairly small space. Oh, and if you've seen other videos on this channel, this system is fully compatible with my other creations, like the city tiles or the city stackers.
Hey crafters, welcome back to HANDCRAFTED. Today we're diving into the creation of Modular Cave Terrain, perfect for RPGs or wargames. This build lets you create a sprawling, mysterious cavern system that you can customize and reconfigure for any adventure. We will be crafting tiles, hills that act as walls too, and some scatter, using simple techniques and materials.
Here are a couple of pictures featuring a little body I crafted using foil and polymer clay. I think this monster fits perfectly with the cave theme, adding that extra touch of atmosphere. Additionally, I've included some shots with an 88mm mini for scale, so you can get a sense of just how big the board can be. One of the standout features of this set is versatility. You can use it to create cave grottos or labyrinths using the negative space between the stackers. For added mystery, you can even cover the tunnels with cardboard, preventing players from knowing which path is correct at any given moment. This opens up endless possibilities for dungeon crawling scenarios and keep your players focused on the game.
By the end of this project, you will have an incredibly versatile set of cave terrain that's both easy to store and fun to use. So, let's get started!
The main material we'll be using for this set is XPS foam. I'm using large 4cm thick insulation boards. Just like in my old video about hills, I'm using cardstock templates to mark the approximate piece measurements. If you want to check it out, I will link it here. This doesn't have to be super precise, but it will differentiate the types of pieces and helps us perform the initial cuts. Once all the necessary pieces are marked, it's time to cut them out. As you can see, I'm not using any guides. It's about cutting everything roughly for now. We will shape each piece later. Here are the rectangles that will serve as the base for shaping the different stackers I have planned. Here you can see the size difference. On Patreon you will find a guide with all the measurements, the number of pieces and layout suggestions, so head over there if you want to see more. Now, what I want to do for these stackable hills is mimic the texture I achieve on this test piece I'm showing you. I made this piece for the video on foam texturing techniques, which I will also link here in case you're interested. I loved the effect I got, so I will base today's build on those techniques. Back to the Proxon, let's now refine the foam piece shapes. You can also do this with a hot knife, handheld cutter or even a kitchen knife, but the Proxon makes it easier. This time we will aim to create organic rounded shapes. To do this, I will try to vary the curve amplitudes and move away from the initial rectangular shape. Next, we will tackle pieces of other sizes. This part is one of my favorites, because using the hot wire cutter is very satisfying, and you can get creative with the shapes. I'm ending up with lots of foam scraps. For now, I'm just tossing them on the floor, but I'm sure I will find a use for them later. Great! With all the pieces cut, it's time to texture the walls. For this, I will use small hobby pliers. With a lot of patience, we will start ripping small chunks off, bit by bit. I recommend starting in the middle section, by laying the pliers sideways and then working on top to bottom. Finally, remove more chunks from the top to create a bit of a bevel. This part of the process is really simple but can be very tedious. Put on some music, a podcast or craft videos to avoid getting bored. I call a friend I play Minecraft with on Discord while texturing the pieces, which made the task much more enjoyable. I ended up with a ton of small foam scraps. What you see in the video isn't even half of everything I made. This time I couldn't think of any use for them, so I threw them out. However, if anyone has any ideas, leave a comment. I'm always in favor of saving and reusing as much material as possible. And we're done. I think it looks pretty good, honestly. Priming this might be a little tricky, since there are so many nooks and crannies, but that's a problem for a future me. After placing everything to see how it looks, I realized we were missing an essential part: stone bridges. This will be a perfect way to connect different cavern parts and provide more mobility for the miniatures. So I went back and cut some more foam pieces, a mix of long and short ones, and used the same plier texturing technique. Not much to say here since I evolved the measurements and did most of the cuts freehand. So I will take the opportunity to remind you once again that the complete guide for this build is available on my Patreon. This time I beveled both the top and the bottom edges, as I think it looks more natural in that way. And hey, speaking of natural forms, to improve the overall look, we will tear off a bit more foam in some areas, not just on the bridges but also across all the hills. This will help create a more organic and realistic appearance without sacrificing playability or ease of storage. I use this technique here and there, trying not to overdo it, and I think it added a nice touch to the pieces. Now we just need to texture the top surface. For this you could glue sand, but I'm using a stone to create an interesting texture. After pressing the foam with that stone, I switched to a foil ball to finish texturing the remaining areas and give a slightly more uniform look. Here's a comparison between a finished piece and an untextured one. It's a huge improvement. Don't forget to do this on the bridges too. Once all the pieces are textured, they will be ready for painting. But before we get into that, let's look at how we will make the floor tiles and also some extra scattered terrain elements.
Alright, before we jumping into making tiles and stalagmites, I wanted to show you something I'm super excited about. A wood burning tool that I recently got as a gift. It's going to be perfect to adding some details to our caves, but don't worry if you don't have one, this is completely optional. And while we're here, if you're enjoying this video or find it useful, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more. This is the easiest way to support the channel and helps me bring more terrain builds like this to you. Alright, so let's get back to crafting.
Do you remember how I made the dirt parts in the city tiles video? Well, for the cave tiles, I will basically use the same techniques but across the entire tile. I will also use the same color scheme to ensure both systems are compatible, but we will see more of that during the painting process. First, we will expose the adhesive side of the vinyl, which apparently I completely forgot to do before applying glue. Please, don't do that. Alright, now for real, remove the paper, add PVA glue and spread it evenly over the surface with a brush. Next, sprinkle a layer of fine sand on top. If there are some slightly larger grains, that's fine, but avoid anything too big to prevent damaging the hills bases when you place them on top. Important tip, place a sheet of paper or something similar under the vinyl to catch the excess sand and avoid making a mess. To summarize, remove the paper, apply and spread the glue, sprinkle the sand over it, shake the tile gently to spread the sand evenly, and remove the excess. Repeat the process for as many tiles as you want and let them dry for at least 12 hours. Great, it's time to prepare some scattered terrain to add a little extra detail to the set. I'm going to make stalagmites. In case you don't know, those are the formations that grow up from the ground. The ones on the ceiling are stalactites, but I didn't want to overcomplicate things by figuring out how to make those without an actual ceiling. As always, the first step is to cut some XPS foam pieces. Then, excited to try out my new wood burning tool, I made this disaster. Absolute fail. So I went back to the Proxxon to freehand cut the pieces, trying to recreate the pointed shape of stalagmites. This time, I was much happier with the results, but I didn't give up on the wood burning tool, you will see why in a moment. Besides the larger pieces, I also used a lot of leftover foam scraps from making the hills to create smaller stalagmites in various sizes. Do you play with clumsy folks who haven't fully developed their motor skills and keep knocking over the scenery? I'm talking about adults here, but if you're playing with kids, this tip will help you too. Add weight to the pieces. Things like screws, rings, fishing weights, or anything that makes the bases heavier and more stable. This will prevent the pieces from tipping over or shifting during your game sessions. Alright, now I will finally use the wood burning tool. I set it to the lowest temperature to texture all the stalagmites. Make gentle passes with the tip, never pausing in one spot for more than a second. These grooves will mimic the layers formed over time and enhance the dry brushing effect during the paint job. To finish, I run the tool's tip lightly along all the edges. This time I put a bit more pressure in certain spots to create small notches. These notches add variety and even more texture. By the way, when using any high temperature tool with foam, whether it's XPS or styrofoam, work in a ventilated area and wear a protective mask. Sadly, I don't have a garden, but I do try to keep several windows open to create a bit of airflow. Now it's time to create some clusters. For this, I will use my hot glue gun and some toothpicks. First, I group the larger pieces together and let the glue cool. Then I glued smaller stalagmites onto the base, adding toothpicks diagonally for extra support. I repeated this process until the cluster was complete. In my case, each cluster had about 5 to 6 stalagmites, but you can use these techniques to make them as large or small as you'd like.
The crafting part is done, and now it's time to bring these caves to life with paint. For this build, I will be using a lot of earthy browns, with some darker tones for shadows and some lighter tones for highlights to really sell that underground vibe. What do you think at this stage? Would you have done something different? If so, let me a comment down below. But also feel free to do it if you have any question, suggestion, or simply want to show some love. Oh, and don't forget to check out my Patreon if you're enjoying these projects. It's filled with the PDF guide for this project, exclusive templates, behind-the-scenes content, and much more. Now let's grab those brushes and give this terrain the finishing touch it deserves.
Alright, let's start the painting process, just like in every single video. Begin with a base coat of black acrylic paint mixed with PPA glue. Take your time, use a large brush for the main areas and a smaller one to get into the nooks and crannies. If you have an airbrush, congratulations! This step will be less painful for you than it was for me. Seriously, the texture looks amazing, but I'm so tired of waiting the paint to dry only to find some small blue spot peeking through. Perfect, now that all the pieces are primed, let's get to the fun part. I will apply both directly onto the tile, and use a wet blending technique to create a richer base color. While I'm doing this, I want to take a moment to thank my first patrons. I appreciate so much that you've chosen to support me, you guys really rock. Once everything is painted, let it dry and move on to the next tile, repeating until they are all done. The next step is overbrushing. I will use the typical earth tones I use for the deer to make sure that the tiles match the rest of my terrain. For this, I will start with a lighter brown to begin highlighting the textures. If you have any doubts about these techniques, check out my basic painting guide. I go into more detail there and explain exactly how to paint dirt. To finish, I will do a light dry brush to highlight the piece and make the details pop out. In this case, I will use fawn color, but any light brown or even light grey will work just fine. And with that, the tiles are done. Ideally, you'd seal them afterward. I didn't have time and wanted to get the video out, but I will try to make the guide soon to show you how to protect your terrain. Now let's continue with the rest of the pieces. This time the color scheme will be a bit different because I want them to stand out from the floor. But don't worry, it's very straightforward, you will see. Start with an overbrush using dark chocolate or any other medium brown. You will notice that the pieces have so much texture that a lot of the black base remains visible in the recesses. Personally, I like this. It adds depth to the color and gives the shadowy cave look I'm aiming for. This color will be applied to the stackers, bridges and stalagmite clusters. In fact, all of the pieces will be painted in the same way. Take your time and use a smaller brush to reach into the crevices that the makeup brush might not cover. For this layer, aim for a relatively uniform color. Variation will come in the next step. So, once the dark brown has dried, it's time to dry brush with honey brown. This is a shade with a more yellowish tone. However, don't apply it uniformly. Instead, focus on highlighting the edges, emphasizing areas that you want to stand out, and adding a few strokes here and there to create color variation and make the pieces more visually interesting. Now, I also considered applying some ink washes in green and dark red to add subtle accents. But ultimately, I decided to keep the cave as generic as possible, with plans to use other elements to bring in color later. I will show you what I mean in a future video. For now, let's check out some cool shots of the finished pieces.
And there you have it! Our modular cave terrain is ready to hit the tabletop. With its reconfigurable design and immersive details, this set is perfect for endless adventures with your friends. And if you'd like to expand your campaign or get some fresh ideas, check out my itch.io page where I've uploaded a bunch of free RPG adventures. One of them, the Spider Queen, pairs perfectly with this terrain. And if you're looking for more inspiration, why not to check out this video or maybe this other one? That's what the algorithm suggests that may be interesting to you. As always, stay creative, keep crafting, and I will see you in the next video.